Hello, Void. Back again. It's been a little bit, but Rizzo's been seeing movies, so I'm here to talk to you about it again. So, made it back out to the theater and took a look at the new Candyman movie. Now, I had to think for a little bit to remember if I actually reviewed Candyman on my show yet, the original. And I'm pretty sure I have not. I think I watched it a month, maybe two, before I started my big this, all of this. So I haven't gotten around to reviewing the original yet. But really, the new one, you can actually go into this one pretty cold and still get quite a bit out of it. I thought it was a good effort at that. Now, I guess I should lay some groundwork. For the original Candyman, it is one of my favorite slasher films. I've seen a lot of slasher films, and I am hard-pressed to determine an actual favorite, but Candyman's definitely up there. It's, in my opinion, one of the great ones, especially since it doesn't feel like a standard slasher movie. Thank you, Cat. It more feels like a haunting gothic fairy tale, just a very dark one. Alright, so the basics of the Candyman legend say the name Candyman in the mirror 5 times and he will appear and kill you. So kind of a takeoff on the whole Bloody Mary myths. But all of the Candyman movies usually have a layer of racial injustice tied in there, which adds several layers. Now, for the new movie, it picks up, well, pretty much real time after the original, so I don't remember exactly when the original Candyman was, but 20, 30 years later. And while it does tie back to the events of the original film, you don't need to have seen the original for it to make a lot of sense. And as for the sequels, Farewell to the Flesh and Day of the Dead, it doesn't really reference them, other than saying the original Candyman's last name, which was established in the later ones. It doesn't really acknowledge the sequels, but doesn't do anything that strictly discounts them either. So it works pretty well as a reboot in that fashion, as it picks up and carries on its own. But if you're familiar with the original material, you do get a little bit more, but it's not strictly required viewing, which I think is quite the accomplishment. Now, the plotline for this one, an artist who's been having some problems getting his work noticed. I guess his critics and distributors have been saying that he's been doing the same thing for far too long, but one of his recent acquaintances essentially tells him a ghost story about the events of the first film, not while not referencing Candyman directly, more of the events of Helen, the lead from the first one. So what's interesting is throughout the whole original Candyman, we see it from Helen's perspective, as her being essentially set up by the Candyman to take the fall for a lot of his crimes and his murders. And in this one, we see it from the outside perspective, with some very neat storytelling styles of shadow puppetry recounting the flashbacks, which is very neat. Now, this one, it kind of it shows from the outside perspective of her being that villain who murdered a bunch of people and ran off with a baby before being burned to death. So it's interesting to show how the story evolves and changes over time, and it does that on several levels, including when they actually start talking about the Candyman. So, our artist, I think his name was Anthony. I saw this about a week ago now, so I've just been too busy to record. He's decides to do a little research and stumbles across the Candyman myths and begins using that for his next bit of art. And he usually does a lot of racially motivated artwork, so the deaths of that inspired one of the Candyman legends becomes his new focus with his Say My Name, or Say His Name piece. Now, one thing that threw me for a second is the Candyman they're talking about is not Daniel Robitaille, which was the original Candyman, but is in fact a new character that shared a very similar but different story many years later. So it's essentially kind of how, while the details of the story may change, the heart of the tragedy can still remain. In fact, it seems to indicate that those two aren't the only people who become the Candyman. As one of the characters says, Candyman isn't a man, he's the whole damn hive. And so we go down the rabbit hole as he gets sucked deeper into the lore of the terrible events that have plagued Cabrini Green, the slum turned high-rise turned that abandoned ghetto, and all the events that have happened there and that tie into these various legends, as well as he's now being sucked into it himself, as people are now starting to say his name again, thanks to his artwork. Now, I'm not going to get too heavy into spoiler territory, but damn, I love this movie. First off, the cinematography is outstanding. A lot of the kill scenes are very stylistically done, so it's rarely just a straight-on jump scare followed by a kill like many slasher movies will do. This one, each one is artistically stands alone very well, and none of them really repeat very much. I won't go into too many details on some of them, but the example of one of the early ones is you only see the Candyman in mirrors, and there's a bunch of mirrors set up through this area, so it's being a lot of being stalked and seen, rarely without any of the characters noticing, and it's a very cool effect. But some of the later ones, just for how things are playing out, are really, it was a blast to watch. It's hard to go into too much detail without spoiling a whole lot on this one, so I'm not going to go too much. My only disappointment in this movie, and this might be a bit of a spoiler, is the distinct lack of Tony Todd. Now, Tony Todd, as I stated in my Sushi Girl reference, is one of my favorite actors. And him being the original Candyman was one of the roles that really drew my attention to him, and his voice in a horror film is haunting. He does have a small role, but his role is more of a cameo that shows how everything kind of ties together, but essentially, otherwise, this is a whole new Candyman set in a similar location, but while acknowledging the events of the first one. And it seems, and it actually, through the use of the shadow puppets, it tells the stories of several other events that could have caused a Candyman to appear. So there's definitely a lot of room to grow into a whole mythology here, and it's very neat. A lot of the political commentary it's there, and it's a bit in your face at times, but considering the characters are an artist that's deliberately trying to portray that, I don't think it's too heavy-handed. And while some of the bits at the end definitely hit the nail right on the head, it's still very satisfyingly done when they get the comeuppance from it. So I can let that slide. This one for me is going to be 4 MacGuffins. It can't top the original by any means, but it's not really trying to. It's definitely pays homage where it needs to, but does its own thing enough. And it keeps the good haunting ghost story atmosphere that the first one had, but the sequel's really lost. So, solid 4 MacGuffins. If it's still playing at theaters, get out and see this one. Otherwise, I'm sure it's going to be coming out shortly. Give it a watch. Highly recommend it. Alright. Have a good night, everyone.